we can illustrate this point about not being able to command the inner world by focusing on anxiety, because anxiety makes the two possible approaches, the difference between the two possible approaches, very clear. So our conventional approach is to say that there is a way for me to move from this position, this place where I'm anxious, to a place where I'm not anxious or less anxious, by carrying out some kind of logical procedure, or some sort of procedure that's based on logic, based on steps. So essentially I can do some stuff to be not anxious. Now, whilst it's true that we can do some stuff to be not anxious on the short term, by distracting ourselves, that doesn't really solve the problem, as I was saying in the last installment. It doesn't solve the problem because it makes the pain of it worse at the price of having a momentary relief, at the price of putting it off a little bit. So the gain is that I get to postpone the dreadful moment and make out that I'm free from anxiety. And the price I pay for that is being disillusioned with my own bullshit, really. And I realize that I'm just bullshitting myself. And when the anxiety comes back again, it hurts all the more. I was not fixing anxiety by distracting myself from anxiety. That's one thing we can say for sure. The distraction method doesn't work. Funnily enough, strange, who would have thought that? This airhead type response of, I know, distract yourself, doesn't work? Come on. Should do, shouldn't it? It ought to work. So there's a consequence of this, and that isn't good for any of us. The consequence is that if I attempt to be non-anxious on purpose, and that in accordance with whatever the officially approved methods are, and that doesn't work, that means I'm to blame. That means I'm at fault, which is, of course, nothing more than good old-fashioned victim blaming. Where would we be without victim blaming? So this is a jinx that's sewn into the very core of our whole system, that we shall give people methods to deal with anxiety that don't work, and then implicitly, because we can't do it explicitly, that wouldn't be very good, but implicitly blame them, because obviously the method works. Obviously the method, how could we possibly question that our method? Oh no, we couldn't possibly, don't need to question that. That definitely works. Sure, isn't it scientific and everything like that? Isn't it evidence-based and everything like that? So instead it's got to be something else if it's not working. It's frankly amazing that we could have carried on for all these years, decades and decades and decades, using these rational approaches to anxiety which don't work, and yet not managed to come close to actually spotting the fact that they don't work. It's kind of amazing. Then the other approach to anxiety is one where we work with the anxiety without an eye to eliminating it, without trying to get rid of it. This doesn't mean that we put up with the anxiety and say, okay, I'm just going to be anxious for the rest of my life. That's a tactic. That's a kind of a mental tactic, if anything. It's like we prejudge it. Oh, it's not going to work, but there's nothing I can do to change it, so I'll just have to put up with it forever. That's the mind projecting its it's well known in black and white scenarios. If I can't fix it, then I'm going to be stuck in it forever. That's only the mind, though. So we shouldn't listen to the thinking mind when it comes to working with anxiety, because it doesn't ever give any good advice. It can't do any good advice. And we shouldn't listen to the thinking mind when we are anxious either. Now that's kind of stupid, really, because we can't help listening to the thinking mind, because the thinking mind speaks. And I think it's me. My thinking mind says some stuff in my head, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm thinking this stuff. So it's very, very hard not to believe the thinking mind, because the thinking mind provides us with our identity, our self. So the thinking mind produces all these thoughts in a mechanical way out of an assembly line. They just keep coming down the pipe. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm thinking this. Oh, I'm thinking that. Oh, I'm thinking the other thought. Some of the thoughts would be good. Some of the thoughts might be bad. And I think, oh, I shouldn't have thought that thought. That was a bad thought. Why am I thinking these thoughts? But whether I think it's a good thought and am proud, or whether it's a thought I shouldn't be thinking and I feel shame, doesn't make any difference. I'm taking responsibility for the thought, and I'm assuming that I am thinking it. I am the thinker, thinking the thought. But I'm not, there's only the thought. The self isn't separate from the thought. The self is an integral part of that thought because it's referring to the self. There is no thinker apart from the thought, as Krishnamurti says. So this is the state of identification. And when we're in the state of identification, there's nothing we can do that's going to be helpful, because we're coming from the wrong angle. We're coming from the wrong place the whole time. We're coming from the place where we think this, I think I am this mind-produced image of myself. And so I will try to win freedom for this mind-produced image of myself, so that this mind-produced image of myself can go on and have a fulfilling and enriched life, and so on. So my efforts are doomed right from the very start, because that isn't me. That isn't who I am. I'm not the mind-produced idea of myself. And because I'm not that idea, because I'm not that image, that ego, there's nothing I can ever do. There's nothing it can ever do. There's nothing I can ever do thinking that I'm it to be free. That image is never going to be free. It's an image. It's never, ever, ever going to be free. It's never, ever going to have a fulfilling life. It's never, ever, whatever. Never, ever, whatever. It's never going to anything. It's a part I'm playing in acting in a play, and I forgot that I'm in a play, and I forgot that I'm acting a part, and then I start having dreams on the basis of who I'm, the role I'm playing, who I think I am. Not only do I have dreams, I have a whole future life mapped out on that basis, and my whole world is centered upon this basis, which is kind of extraordinary, because I never look in the other direction. I never look in where the projection mechanism is. I only just look out at the projection. So I can spend my whole life fretting about whether the life that I've planned on the basis of this self-image is going to happen correctly or not. When I think it's going to happen in the way I want, I feel giddy and excited. And when I start to suspect that it won't, I'm racked with anguish. And the whole thing is absurd, because neither the good things nor the bad things can happen. So this really is an example of what Wei Wu Wei calls pseudo-suffering. Wei Wu Wei says only an object can suffer, only a thing can suffer. And so all the suffering or at least a lot of the suffering we experience in life, is the suffering that comes because we imagine ourselves to be a thing when we're not, a construct when we're not, an idea of who we are when that idea couldn't be further from the truth. An idea about something can never ever be further away from the truth it's actually trying to represent, which is a strange thing to consider. And that is because there is an absolute insurmountable difference between the products of thought and the world as it is in itself. Our representations of the world as it is in itself are merely they're formalities. They're just little squiggles on a page. They can betoken what they're talking about, they can stand for it, but they do not contain any essence of it. So the word fire doesn't contain any essence or nugget of fire. We can't burn ourselves on it. Therefore, the word or the idea fire has nothing to do with fire. There's no shade quality there. And in the same way, my idea of who I am has absolutely nothing in it of who I really am. One is merely a token of the other, but when we don't know this and we live the tokenistic life, living life on the basis of the mental token of who we are, we incur all sorts of problems that can't be healed, can't be cured, at least not on the basis of this mistaken identity, as Wei Wu Wei calls it. On the basis of this mistaken identity, nothing I do is going to come out okay. Nothing. Out of the mistaken identity can come nothing but mistakes. So coming back to anxiety, we could say that anxiety is actually a link between where we are in our confused way of being, where we have identified with the token of ourselves, and the actual reality. Now, we haven't got much of a link, and what link we do have is very hard to recognize it because it comes in the form of pain and suffering. So it doesn't look like a link with the reality, but it is. And the reason it's a link with the reality is because we're in this neat little mind-created world where everything's upside down, everything's inverted, everything is the antithesis of what it truly is. It's a world where we chase slavery on the impression that we're actually seeking freedom or going to get freedom. It's a world in which we accrue suffering whilst carrying on our activities that are supposed to bring us satisfaction and happiness. So it's a backwards world. And it'll only stop being a backwards world when we realize that we aren't the mental token of who we are. So what Søren Kierkegaard says on the subject of anxiety is that it is something of a boon, because if we can correctly experience the anxiety, that's not his exact words, but I can't remember his exact words, but were we to experience our anxiety properly, that would be our way of finding authentic life for ourselves. That would be a way for us to become authentic. So that's a very precious opportunity, because in the rest of life, all the stuff that happens to us when we're not being anxious, there's very few opportunities for us to be authentic in that. It's only the anxiety, only the pain, because the pain is getting us to think about something that we don't want to think about. It's getting us to face a very, very central problem that we won't look at because we always look in the other direction. Experiencing our anxiety doesn't mean allowing it to overwhelm us, says Kierkegaard. Obviously, that isn't helping us to live more authentically. That's just a real pain in the arse, being really, really anxious. And neither does running away from our anxiety. So supposing we were able to insulate ourselves, and much of what we do in life is to place insulation between ourselves and existential anxiety, all of the structures and systems we create. That's their only function, really. So it is possible to create a distance between us and our anxiety. And then we live in a safe way. We're safe. But at the price of having no authenticity. So it's a straight choice, really. I can live in a very, very superficial or inauthentic way, and yet be weirdly comfortable in that, and have no sense of any, have no angst about it. Or I can live life in the profound way, which is full of angst, which is full of insecurity. And yet, at the same time, it's not a matter of just bowing to the anxiety or bowing to the insecurity and suffering away day after day, because that'll happen by itself. That'll happen no problem when we've got anxiety. That isn't the answer. It's like saying falling off a log is the answer. That happens by itself. There's no great learning to be had out of it. But there is another way. So there's the two ways we can distance ourselves from our anxiety, or we can be overwhelmed by it, says Kierkegaard. And the other possibility is that we don't try and run away from it, but honestly experience whatever it is we are experiencing. And notice what that feels like. We don't normally do that. If I'm really anxious, there's a part of me judging that anxiety as being a thoroughly unwanted state of mind, undesirable, unhelpful state of mind. I'm opposed to it. I'm resisting it with everything I've got. I don't see it as an opportunity to break through to a more authentic life. I see it as something that is damaging my life, taking away from my life, reducing my quality of life, which on one level it certainly is. But the point which is so hard to bear in mind is that life is becoming untenable, life is becoming exceedingly difficult, and life is becoming a huge effort, and a pointless effort, because my huge effort isn't getting me anywhere with regard to anxiety. I'm just going in circles. And yet, the one for whom life is becoming untenable is the token me. So I'm actually being more conscious of what it feels like to live as the token of me, the idea of who I am. And that doesn't feel any very good at all. Little enough to recommend that we should try to notice what that feels like. we might say. But that isn't the case, because normally what we do is we go through our lives as we do on the basis of the token self, is that we make everything palatable with illusions. So we populate our whole world with illusions, hopeful illusions. Stuff's going to be good. Stuff's great. Stuff is going to be good. I'm living my best life. Yeah, whatever. That kind of stuff. This constant song of everything's great, everything's great, everything's going to be great. It's like just superficial optimism. That's all it is, really, as an answer to everything. So that's the illusion that makes life on the basis of the token possible. Because, okay, we have bad times and we go through it, and it's like we'll never get through it, and then we get through it, and then we start on the illusions again, thinking everything's going to be great. So the thing about experiencing when we are anxious, exactly what it feels like to be anxious, is that we are experiencing what it feels like to be this brittle self-image or self-concept. And we're experiencing the hardships of that self-concept as ours. We're putting ourselves in that chair and experiencing it, and it's like, wow, this is awful. And it is. From that viewpoint, it truly is. But at the same time, when we're not afraid to experience this on the basis of the token self, the tokenistic self, something else happens that changes the picture an awful lot. What happens is that an awareness cuts in, a deeper awareness, a profound awareness that I am not this token image of me. I am not this self-concept. It doesn't make any sense at all. There's no way to compute it, but there's a sense. And so were we to continue this way, to continue to live as the self-concept and live on that basis without making all sorts of ridiculous, optimistic, positive talk, or have positive thoughts about it the whole time, so that we think we've got a future, because that the token self doesn't have a future. It's just fighting what's inevitably going to happen, which is that it's going to be found out. It's a lie that's going to be found out. It's an illusion that's going to be seen through sooner or later. So what we call mental health is fighting and fighting and fighting to make it later. Postpone the day, postpone the day. Only we don't admit that we're postponing the day, because we don't even want to, well, we especially don't want to take it on board that this is inevitable. So we kid ourselves that we've solved the problem. But the conditioned self itself is the problem, and it can never be solved. It can only be solved when we stop thinking that we are the conditioned self, when we drop it. When we drop it, it's not a problem. No self, no problem, says, as the Buddhist saying has it. So by going down this road, which, number one, it's the road we're going down, the road of being anxious. And number two, it's the road we don't want to go down, because thought tells us it's going to a bad place. The key thing to understand is it's not going to a bad place, because it's actually real. Nothing real goes to a bad place. It's only the illusions. It's only the lies that we tell ourselves, the comforting distractions we entertain ourselves with that take us to a bad place. So the road that we're actually on can be awfully rocky and awfully rough, but it never takes us to a bad place.